A wealthy couple deliberately spilled coffee on a quiet stranger and filmed it for humiliation, not knowing the man beside the German Shepherd was a Navy SEAL. The man didn't raise his voice, he just breathed slow like a prayer, and the whole café felt smaller. Then the dog's ears snapped up as if warning him. Because this wasn't just bullying, something was hidden under a seat. Stay to the end because when the truth shows up, money won't cover it. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more. A thin winter sun skimmed Seabrook's shoreline, turning salt spray into glitter and making the cafe windows look like polished coins. Inside, the air smelled of espresso, butter, and something quieter. The kind of silence people wear when they don't want trouble. Ethan Carter stepped in like he was measuring the room for exits without meaning to. He was 35, built lean and dense, shoulders squared by years of training and a life that didn't offer soft landings. His face had sharp angles softened by fatigue, a faint scar threading one cheekbone, and eyes that looked older than his age, as if sleep had become an occasional visitor instead of a habit. He wore a weathered jacket and jeans that had seen too many gas stations and too few good nights. He didn't announce himself. Men like him rarely did. He chose a back booth, half shadow, back to the wall, the seat that let him see the door. It wasn't paranoia, not exactly. It was muscle memory, pretending to be manners. Ranger followed at his heel with the quiet precision of a metronome. The German Shepherd was about 4 years old, tall and athletic, with a striking coat that blended silver, gray, and white like storm clouds stitched together. His ears were upright, his gaze steady, and his movements disciplined enough to make you forget he was an animal at all, until you noticed the warmth in the way he angled his body toward Ethan, as if guarding the fragile parts that didn't show. Ranger settled beside the booth, paws tucked, chest low, eyes occasionally flicking to Ethan's face for cues, like reading a book he'd memorized but still respected. Ethan slid a hand down to the dog's collar, not gripping, just touching, grounding himself the way some men hold rosaries. He told himself he was only here for breakfast. He didn't tell himself how hard it had been to walk into any public room lately, how the clatter of plates could sometimes sound like something else if his mind slipped a half-inch. A young waitress approached with careful steps, as if the air around Ethan might crack. Her name tag read MIA, and she looked 20-something, slim and quick, with warm brown skin and curly hair tied up in a messy knot that kept falling loose. Her eyes were bright but cautious, the kind of eyes that had learned which customers paid in cash and which paid in entitlement. "Morning," she said softly, polite but not fake. "Table for one?" Ethan nodded. "And him," Mia added, glancing at Ranger. Her voice dipped into a whisper, not because she disliked the dog, but because she was checking the rules of this town like they were landmines. Ethan met her gaze, calm and steady. He stays. He's trained. Mia's shoulders relaxed by a fraction, like she'd been hoping that would be true. "Okay, I'll bring water." Ethan watched her go and felt that familiar tug of wanting to tip too much, to apologize with money for simply existing as a complication. He didn't. He waited. He listened to the cafe's soft chatter and tried to be ordinary, even as his body stayed ready, even as his thoughts wandered to nights when the ocean was black glass and everything depended on silence. The bell over the door chimed again, sharp as a coin hitting marble. Richard Holloway entered first, and the temperature of the room shifted without anyone touching the thermostat. He was in his early 60s, tall, silver-haired, with a jaw that looked carved rather than grown, and a smile that had never learned humility. His coat was expensive in a way that didn't try to hide it, and his posture carried the lazy confidence of someone who'd spent decades being obeyed. Vanessa Holloway followed beside him, also early 60s, elegant and thin, with smooth, pale skin, manicured hands, and glossy blonde hair that never seemed to move out of place. Her eyes were cool, scanning, not looking for people so much as evaluating the room like a purchase. Together they moved like a matched set of trophies, the kind that comes with invisible assistance and visible expectations. Vanessa's gaze landed on Ranger as if the dog had insulted her personally. Her lips tightened. "That smell," she said, voice sweet enough to be poisonous. "It gives me a headache." Richard's mouth curled. "Some places don't know standards," he replied, loud enough for nearby tables to hear, as if they were all invited to laugh. No one laughed. Seabrook people had a talent for silence. They approached the counter, and Mia reappeared with water, her smile stretched thin. "Welcome back," she said, the words practiced. Vanessa didn't answer Mia. Her attention stayed on Ethan's booth like a magnet seeking metal. "They allow dogs inside now?" Vanessa asked, not as a question, but as a complaint dressed in grammar. Mia glanced at the owner's sign, then at Ethan, then back at Vanessa. "Service animals are allowed, ma'am." "That's convenient," Vanessa said, as if convenience were a crime. Richard's eyes flicked to Ethan. The camouflage hoodie under Ethan's jacket, the straight spine, the quiet dog, the absence of apology. It all read like defiance to someone who believed comfort was a right. Richard stepped closer, slow and casual, and brushed the edge of Vanessa's designer bag against the water glass on Ethan's table, the motion just clumsy enough to be deniable, and just deliberate enough to land. The glass tipped, hit the table, and shattered. Water surged onto the floor with a cold slap, spreading toward Ranger's paws. The sound didn't echo. The entire café swallowed it. Ethan stared at the broken glass for a heartbeat, the way a man looks at a memory he didn't ask for. He didn't flinch. He didn't stand. He didn't shout. He simply inhaled, controlled, and reached for napkins like he'd practiced the art of staying human. He slid down from the booth and knelt, hands steady, gathering shards with the care of someone who'd learned that chaos punishes carelessness. Ranger didn't move an inch. His eyes watched Richard, then returned to Ethan, awaiting instruction. Ethan's mind ran its old math, threat and distance and consequence, but he kept it behind his face. Behind them, Mia froze, a coffee pot in her hands shaking slightly. Vanessa's voice cut through the silence. "Are you going to let that dirty dog just lie there?" Ethan didn't look up right away. When he did, his expression was calm, almost gentle, but there was a heaviness behind it, as if patience was a door he kept locked for everyone's safety. "He's cleaner than most," Ethan said quietly, not sarcastic, just true. Richard scoffed. Vanessa's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, her polished mask cracked with irritation. Ethan went back to picking up glass, refusing to give them the performance they wanted. Then Ranger's head tilted, sudden and precise, nose lifting toward the air like a compass needle catching a hidden north. Ethan felt it too, not a smell he could name at first, but something sharp under the coffee and butter. His hand paused over a shard. His pulse didn't spike, but his focus tightened, the way a storm tightens the sky before thunder. He whispered without meaning to, the words slipping out like a secret. "Why does it smell like explosives in here?" The broken glass was gone, but the hush it created stayed, hanging in the café like fog that refused to lift. Ethan slid back into the booth slowly, not because he was tired, but because he refused to give anyone the satisfaction of thinking they'd moved him. Ranger returned to his place at Ethan's feet, silver gray-white fur catching the window light, ears forward, eyes bright with that alert calm that looked almost statuesque. Ethan's fingertips rested against the dog's collar again, a small contact point, a quiet agreement. Stay steady, stay kind, stay ready. Across the room, Vanessa Holloway's annoyance sharpened into a kind of performance. She moved with the practiced grace of a woman who'd learned to turn discomfort into authority, her posture straight, chin lifted, the corners of her mouth tight as if smiling cost her money. She cut toward the booth, Richard at her shoulder, like a shadow wearing expensive cologne. Mia hovered nearby, clutching her coffee pot, knuckles pale, the polite panic of service work fighting with the human instinct to protect someone being cornered. "I'm so sorry," Mia began, voice trembling, aiming the apology at Ethan even though she didn't owe it to him. Vanessa snapped her head toward Mia, a swift, surgical motion. "Don't apologize," she said, sweetly cruel. "This place is one of our regular spots. I don't want that under people's feet." She didn't point at Ranger. She didn't have to. The insult was a perfume that spread on its own. Richard's eyes stayed on Ethan, measuring him the way some men measure land, with a sense of ownership. He reached into his wallet with theatrical ease and pulled out a crisp $100 bill, as clean as the life he wanted everyone to believe he lived. He placed it on Ethan's table, not gently, not respectfully, but with the careless flick of someone feeding pigeons. "Take your dog outside," Richard said, voice carrying. "Here, for the inconvenience." Ethan looked at the bill as if it were a strange insect. Money wasn't new to him, but this kind of money was, the money used like a leash. He lifted his gaze to Richard's face, calm enough to irritate, controlled enough to scare people who only understood loud. "I'm having breakfast," Ethan said. "Ranger hasn't harmed anyone." Vanessa's eyes narrowed, and she did what polished cruelty always does when it meets quiet dignity. She reached for an audience. She raised her phone, sleek and gleaming, and angled it toward Ethan. In the screen's reflection, Ethan saw himself as she wanted the internet to see him. A tired man, a big dog, a potential headline. Vanessa's voice softened into a fake concern, perfect for captions. "Sir, you're making people uncomfortable," she said, the words honeyed and sharp. "Maybe you're not stable." Richard chuckled. "Guys with working dogs like that always have something wrong," he said. "What are you, ex-military, or just playing dress-up?" The word dress-up landed like a slap because it tried to steal the meaning of everything Ethan had survived. For a brief second, Ethan felt his jaw tighten, not with rage, but with the old ache of being misunderstood by people who'd never had to earn their calm. His mind flickered backward. Desert heat, ocean darkness, a teammate's last breath trapped behind a visor, the way silence can be both a weapon and a funeral. After the last deployment, the war had followed him home in smaller disguises. Insomnia that made dawn feel like punishment, nightmares that stole his appetite, jobs that vanished when employers noticed how often his hands shook after loud noises. He'd driven long-haul deliveries for months, sleeping in the truck when he couldn't afford a room, eating from gas station shelves, pretending the loneliness didn't have teeth. Ranger had come into his life when a trainer friend said, "You don't need pity, you need a partner." The dog wasn't a badge. The dog was a bridge. Ethan inhaled slowly, counting the breath the way he'd been taught to count triggers. 4 in, hold, 4 out. He placed his hand on Ranger's shoulder, steady pressure, a silent command for stillness and a reminder for himself that strength didn't need to bark. "Turn the camera off," Ethan said quietly, not as a plea. Vanessa's smile thinned. "Or what?" she asked, delighted by the idea of provoking him. She leaned closer, phone still up, seeking the angle that would make him look bigger, scarier. Around them, a few patrons kept their eyes on menus they weren't reading, and one man in a golf sweater pretended to scroll his watch. The room was full of people practicing cowardice politely. Mia stepped forward with a fresh cup of coffee, hands shaking but determined. "On the house," she murmured to Ethan, trying to be a small kindness in a big ugliness. Vanessa's hand shot out and nudged the cup as it reached the table. Coffee spilled in a dark wave across Ethan's worn jacket, soaking the fabric like an accusation. Vanessa's eyes widened in theatrical surprise. "Oh no," she cooed. "How clumsy of me." Ethan didn't move at first. He looked down at the spreading stain, watched it seep into the threads, and felt a strange clarity settle in. The smell that had pricked his senses moments ago still lingered beneath the cafe's warmth, faint but wrong, like a whisper behind a door. His gaze lifted to Vanessa's phone, the lens still pointed at him, hungry. He could feel the trap tightening. If he snapped, he'd be the villain forever. If he stayed silent, they'd keep pushing until someone bled. Ethan's voice dropped to a low calm, the kind that carried across battlefields without needing volume. "If you're trying to see me explode," he said, eyes steady on Richard now, "you're standing in the most dangerous place to ask for it." Richard's smirk faltered, just for a heartbeat, as if he'd heard something in Ethan's tone that didn't belong in a cafe. Ranger didn't growl. He didn't bare teeth. He simply shifted his weight slightly, shoulders coiling like a spring that knew exactly when not to release. Vanessa's phone trembled a fraction, betraying her nerves. Ethan stayed seated, composed, but inside him a warning bell rang softly. This wasn't only about humiliation anymore. Something else was here, hidden under the noise. The coffee stain on Ethan's jacket cooled into a stiff, dark patch, but the heat in the room kept rising, fed by the Holloway's need to win. Vanessa kept her phone up like a lantern meant to expose monsters, and Richard stood close enough to make the air feel smaller, his cologne mixing with that faint, wrong scent Ethan couldn't place. Ethan's posture stayed controlled, yet inside his ribs, his instincts paced like a caged animal, not angry, just alert, listening for the moment ordinary turns into dangerous. Richard leaned in with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Up close, his wealth showed in small details, smooth hands that had never hauled anything heavier than ego, a watch that glinted like a threat, and a confidence hardened by decades of people stepping aside. He lowered his voice, but not enough. "You want to play tough," Richard said, then let his gaze drop to Ranger. "Let's see what the dog does." Before Ethan could speak, Richard stepped around the booth and crouched as if he had a right to be there. His fingers reached for Ranger's leash near the collar, giving it a light tug, a testing pull, the way you might test a horse's reins at an auction. Ranger did not lunge. He didn't bark. He remained down, but his shoulders tightened, muscles coiling under that silver-gray-white coat like tension wrapped in fur. His eyes flicked once to Ethan, asking permission to become something else. Ethan rose from the booth slowly, the movement deliberate, offering no sudden motion for Vanessa's camera to weaponize. He positioned himself between Richard and the dog without touching Richard at all, his stance wide and calm, hands open, a human barricade built from restraint. "Don't touch him," Ethan said, not loud, not dramatic, just absolute. Richard's grin widened, delighted by the boundary. "Look at that," he said to the room, as if narrating a show. "A trained dog. Bet he bites on command." Vanessa laughed, thin and sharp. In the harsh light, her makeup looked flawless, but her expression showed something brittle underneath, like a glass ornament that hated being reminded it could break. "If that animal snaps," she said, "we'll own this place by lunch. We have attorneys on speed dial. What do you have?" Ethan held her gaze, and the answer sat behind his eyes. "I have people I buried. I have nights I can't sleep. I have a body trained to end problems fast, and a mind trained to stop it." He didn't say any of that. He only tightened his jaw, forcing his voice to stay steady. "I have control," he replied. Richard straightened, still too close. "Control?" he mocked. "Your dog looks like a loaded weapon." Ethan glanced down at Ranger, and felt something soften inside him, something that had survived the worst parts of his life and still insisted on kindness. Ranger wasn't a weapon. Ranger was a promise that Ethan could be trusted with power again. The bell over the door rang suddenly, bright and urgent. A child burst into the café like a gust of wind with sneakers. He was about 8, small and quick, with sandy blonde hair that stuck up as if he'd been running for hours, and freckles scattered across his cheeks like spilled cinnamon. His hoodie was too thin for the ocean chill outside, and his eyes were wide with the fearless speed of kids who haven't learned where danger hides. His name, Ethan would learn later, was Benny, and he carried a plastic dinosaur clutched in one hand like a talisman. Benny dodged between tables, nearly slipping on the damp spot where Ethan had cleaned the water earlier. His foot caught the edge of a chair, and his body pitched forward toward the corner where a few tiny glass shards had escaped the sweep. Time changed shape. It slowed the way it always did for Ethan in the moment right before impact. His training didn't feel like heroism. It felt like gravity. Ethan moved without thinking, stepping in fast, one hand catching Benny by the hoodie and yanking him back with controlled force, the other foot sliding out to nudge a remaining shard farther under the counter where no small hand would reach. Benny's breath hitched as he stumbled into Ethan's chest, then into safety. At the same instant, Ranger rose smoothly, not with aggression, but with purpose, placing his body between Benny and Richard, between Ethan and anyone who might take advantage of the chaos. Ranger's ears stayed up, eyes sharp, tail still, a living wall that didn't threaten but didn't yield. The entire café exhaled at once, like a lung finally remembering air. For a heartbeat, even Richard went silent, surprised by the speed, the precision, the fact that nothing about Ethan's movement was clumsy or panicked. Vanessa's phone wobbled, and her voice rushed in to patch her control. "There," she snapped, turning the camera toward Ranger standing. "See? It stood up. It's dangerous. It's out of control." Ethan's eyes went cold, not cruel, just tired of lies. "He stood up to protect a kid," Ethan said, voice low. "That's what discipline looks like." Benny clung to Ethan's jacket, fingers gripping the stained fabric, and looked up with watery eyes. Behind the counter, Mia pressed a hand to her mouth, shaken but relieved. Benny's chest rose and fell fast. Then, as the room's attention scattered, the boy leaned toward Mia like he was carrying a secret too heavy for his small lungs. "Miss," he whispered, voice trembling, "I saw that man, the mean one, put something under his seat." Mia's face drained of color. Her gaze snapped to Richard's booth area, and for the first time her fear wasn't just about rude customers. It was about something worse, something that didn't care about money or pride. Mia bent slightly, eyes searching beneath the chair leg shadows, and she saw it, a small bundle wrapped in cloth, tucked where a shoe might not kick it by accident. Her breath caught. "Oh my God," she whispered, barely audible. "What is that?" Mia's fingers trembled as she leaned toward the bundled cloth beneath Richard's chair, curiosity and duty wrestling in her hands. But Ethan's voice cut through the room like a calm bell in a storm. "Don't touch it. Step back." He didn't shout, yet the café obeyed him the way bodies obey a lifeguard's whistle. It wasn't authority bought with money. It was authority earned in places where mistakes cost more than embarrassment. Mia froze, then retreated 2 steps, her face pale, eyes wide, breathing shallow. Benny clung to the side of the counter, dinosaur toy pressed to his chest like a shield, staring at the bundle as if it might grow teeth. Ethan kept himself between the crowd and the object, shoulders squared, hands open. Ranger stood at his left, silver-gray-white coat bristling in the light, not aggressive, just perfectly placed, like a door you cannot push through. Ethan's mind ran quiet calculations, distance, panic, exits, and the thin line between a calm room and a stampede. He lifted 2 fingers slightly, a small signal, and Ranger lowered his head to the floor with the careful seriousness of a professional. The dog sniffed once, then twice, and immediately shifted back, increasing the space between himself and the bundle with practiced precision, as if he'd learned long ago that bravery isn't closeness, it's control. Ethan's stomach tightened. The faint wrong scent he'd caught earlier sharpened into recognition, not a single thing, but a category of danger, the kind that doesn't belong near diners and children. Richard's expression changed fast, like a mask slipping. His confidence cracked at the edges. Vanessa's phone, which had been raised like a weapon all morning, lowered so quickly it was almost a confession. "What is this?" Mia whispered, voice thin. Ethan didn't answer her directly. He didn't want more words than necessary. "Everyone stays calm," he said, scanning the room with a steady gaze. "Nobody touches it. Nobody runs." Richard forced a laugh that landed wrong, too loud, too eager. "You hear yourself?" he snapped. "Giving orders in my town? Who do you think you are?" Ethan looked at him, and something tired passed through his eyes. He reached into his wallet, but not for money. He pulled out a plain ID card, the kind that didn't glitter, the kind that didn't beg to be photographed. He held it at chest height, angled so only someone close could see. "I'm someone who doesn't want anybody hurt," Ethan said quietly. "Not you, not your wife, not the kid, not the staff." Richard lunged, quick and angry, fingers reaching for the card like he could steal reality itself. Ethan shifted a half step, smooth as a wave sliding around a rock, and Richard's hand grabbed nothing but air. Ranger moved at the same time, stepping in front of Ethan with a silent firmness. His eyes were cold glass, his posture a warning, but he did not snap. He didn't need to. Vanessa's voice wobbled, the first real fear breaking through her polished tone. "Richard, stop, please." Richard's nostrils flared, and for a split second he looked less like a king and more like a man cornered by his own lies. "It's nothing," he said too quickly. "I put it there by accident. I mixed up a bag. That's all." Nobody believed him. Even the customers who had hidden behind menus now stared openly, as if the spell of polite silence had been shattered along with the glass. Outside, sirens rose and fell, distant but approaching, a sound that made Vanessa's shoulders tense and made Richard's jaw go rigid. The cafe door flew open and a man in a dark security jacket hurried in, breath sharp from running. His name patch read, Marcus. He was late 30s, broad-shouldered, with close-cropped hair and a face that looked like it had learned to stay neutral during rich people emergencies. His eyes darted from Ethan to the bundle to Richard, then back, trying to decide who the problem was and who the solution might be. "Everyone okay?" Marcus asked, voice professional, hands hovering near his belt without touching anything. Ethan gave him a quick look, the kind of look that says follow my lead without ego. "Keep people back," Ethan said. Marcus hesitated only a heartbeat, then nodded and spread his arms, guiding patrons away from the danger zone with firm, practiced movements. The sirens stopped outside. Footsteps came fast. Then another man entered, not in a uniform that demanded attention, but in a simple jacket that didn't. He was mid-40s, average height, with a lean build and an expression that had been trained to read rooms like maps. His eyes moved in clean lines, scanning exits, faces, hands, the bundle, and Ethan. He carried himself with quiet certainty, the kind that doesn't rush because it doesn't need to. He held up a badge briefly, just enough to be seen, and his voice was controlled. "Agent Harris," he said, "who called this in?" Richard's mouth opened, then closed. Vanessa looked as if she'd swallowed ice. Mia pointed shakily toward Ethan, But Ethan lifted one hand, not claiming glory, just claiming order. "The kid saw something placed under the chair," Ethan said. "I asked everyone to step back. That's it." Harris nodded once, eyes sharpening as they fell on the bundled cloth, then flicked to Ethan's ID still in his hand. Recognition didn't bloom like surprise. It landed like confirmation. "Good," Harris said, low. He gestured to someone outside, unseen, and spoke into a radio with clipped calm. No one in the café heard details, only the tone of procedure, the sound of professionals closing in around a problem. Harris approached the bundle with deliberate care, not touching it until he had the right tools and the right spacing, his movements precise and respectful of risk. Richard tried to reclaim the narrative, voice rising. "This is ridiculous. Do you know who I am?" Harris didn't look up. "I'm more interested in what you are," he replied. A minute later, Harris's expression hardened, and the air seemed to thicken again. He turned to Marcus. "Clear the front area." Then he turned to Richard and Vanessa. "You two need to come with us." Vanessa's lips parted in disbelief. "We're not criminals," she said, but her voice didn't convince even her. Richard's face twisted, fury fighting panic. "That video," he hissed to Vanessa, suddenly remembering the footage she'd been filming like a trophy. Vanessa's hands shook as she clutched the phone, realizing it had captured more than humiliation. It had captured their proximity, their lies, the moment the bundle became real. Harris's agents moved in. Richard and Vanessa were separated, questioned, and held, their expensive composure collapsing into something raw and ordinary. Ethan didn't celebrate. He only exhaled slowly, feeling Ranger's shoulder brush his leg, as if to say, "Still here, still steady." As cuffs clicked around Richard's wrists, the wealthy man leaned forward, eyes burning, voice dropping into something poisonous, meant only for Ethan. "You think this ends here?" Richard whispered. "I have money, and money always finds a way." The cafe felt like a house after a storm, intact but changed, every corner suddenly aware it could have been worse. Agent Harris's team moved with quiet efficiency, voices low, hands steady, guiding Richard and Vanessa Holloway toward the door. Richard's expensive anger had nowhere to land now. It clung to him like wet clothing. Vanessa walked stiffly, chin raised by habit, but her eyes kept darting to the phone in her hand, as if it had become a live wire. The cuffs didn't look dramatic, just final, and the sound of them clicking was a plain, honest kind of music. Outside, the patrol vehicles waited with their lights spinning, blue and red, washing over Seabrook's polished storefronts like a reminder that even rich towns have shadows. Benny's mother arrived in a rush, a woman in her early 30s named Lisa, with auburn hair pulled into a hurried ponytail and a face that wore equal parts exhaustion and fierce love. She scooped Benny into her arms, checking him over with trembling hands. "Benny," she breathed, voice breaking. Benny pointed his dinosaur toward Ethan like a knight presenting a sword. "He saved me," he said, still sniffling. Lisa's gaze snapped to Ethan, then to Ranger, and her shoulders sagged in relief so deep it looked like surrender. "Thank you," she whispered. I don't know what would have happened." Ethan nodded once, not dismissive, just careful with emotion, like a man who'd learned that gratitude can feel heavy when you don't believe you deserve it. "He's okay," Ethan said gently. "That's what matters." Ranger sat again, calm as stone, the silver gray-white fur along his spine catching the rotating lights through the window, making him look almost mythic for a second, like a guardian carved from winter. Mia remained near the counter, hands clasped tightly, her face still pale from adrenaline. When the Holloways disappeared through the door and the sirens faded into the distance, the cafe exhaled as one. People began to move again, chairs scraping, murmurs rising, the world stitching itself back together. But something in the room had shifted. The old habit of looking away had been interrupted, and it didn't slide back into place so easily. Mia stepped around the counter and approached Ethan's booth with small, hesitant steps. Up close, her youth showed in the fine tremble of her hands and the way she kept swallowing as if words were too dry to go down. "I'm sorry," she said, eyes shining with shame. "I should have said something earlier. I should have, I don't know, done more." Ethan looked at her and saw not weakness, but the ordinary human fear that keeps so many people quiet until the moment they can't be. He shook his head slowly. "People get scared," he said. His voice carried no judgment, only truth. "What matters is when the moment comes, you choose what kind of person you're going to be." Mia blinked hard, and a tear slipped down her cheek before she could catch it. She gave a small, shaky laugh, embarrassed by her own feelings. "The house is covering your meal," she said quickly, trying to wrap gratitude in practicality. "And I'm getting you a new jacket, or at least I'm trying." Ethan's mouth twitched, the faintest hint of a smile, more in his eyes than his lips. "The coffee was enough," he replied, but the way he said it made Mia straighten, like she'd been forgiven by someone she respected. Around them, patrons who'd avoided Ethan's gaze earlier now nodded at him, some with awkward admiration, some with quiet apology. One older man in a knit cap even murmured, "Good dog," toward Ranger, and Ranger's ears flicked once, acknowledging without demanding attention. It felt like Ethan was being seen, not as a threat or a spectacle, but as a person, and the simplicity of that nearly hurt. Agent Harris returned inside after speaking to his team. In the bright café light, he looked ordinary in the way true professionals often do. Plain jacket, clean-shaven face, eyes that missed nothing. But there was a weariness at the corners of his mouth, the kind that comes from years of watching people make the same mistakes with different faces. He approached Ethan with a respectful distance and spoke quietly, so the room couldn't turn it into gossip. "You handled that well," Harris said. "Better than most would." Ethan's shoulders lifted slightly, then settled. "I didn't want anyone to panic," he answered. Harris nodded, then hesitated as if deciding whether to offer something that wasn't strictly procedural. "Listen," he said, voice softer. "There are programs for guys like you. Transition support, counseling that doesn't feel like a courtroom, and support for working dogs too. Proper care, training refreshers, medical coverage options." He studied Ethan's face, as if expecting resistance. "I can connect you, if you want." For a heartbeat, Ethan felt the old instinct to refuse help, the instinct that said needing anything made you weak. That instinct had kept him alive in war and nearly drowned him in peace. He looked down at Ranger. The dog's eyes met his, steady and trusting, silver in the light, and Ethan felt something inside him unclench, a knot he hadn't realized he'd been carrying for years. He reached down and rested his palm on Ranger's thick coat, the blend of gray and white and silver like a living shoreline. "Yeah," Ethan said quietly. "I'd like that." Harris's expression softened, a rare thing, like a door opening an inch. He handed Ethan a simple card with a number and a name, nothing flashy, just a path forward. Ethan tucked it into his wallet like it was more valuable than Richard's crisp $100 bill had ever been. When Ethan finally stood to leave, Mia placed a fresh coffee in a to-go cup at the edge of the table, her hands steadier now. "For the road," she said. Ethan nodded and left a tip that was generous, but not theatrical. Outside, the ocean air met him like cold honesty. He walked down to the beach with Ranger at his side, boots pressing into damp sand. The waves rolled in and retreated, patient as time, and Ethan watched them the way someone watches a heartbeat, proof that movement can be gentle and still be strong. Ranger trotted ahead for a moment, then looped back in a small circle, tail wagging just once, controlled but happy, like a period at the end of a sentence that finally makes sense. Ethan's chest lifted with a breath that didn't feel borrowed. The night wouldn't magically become easy. The memories wouldn't vanish. But something had shifted. 3 small lights in the aftermath. Justice where arrogance had tried to rule. Dignity where humiliation had been demanded. And a quiet bridge toward healing where loneliness had waited. Ethan rested his hand again on Ranger's back and stared at the horizon, not as a man running from darkness, but as a man willing to keep walking into the day. Sometimes the miracle isn't thunder from the sky. It's restraint in a moment that begged for rage. It's a steady hand, a loyal dog, a stranger choosing mercy when pride demanded violence. In a world where money tries to buy truth and fear tries to silence courage, God still sends quiet witnesses, the ones who step between danger and the innocent, the ones who protect without needing applause. And maybe that's how grace moves in everyday life, not always as a grand rescue, but as a small decision to do what's right when no one is watching. So if you're carrying heavy days, remember, God can use your calm, your patience, your love, and even your scars to shield someone else. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Drop a comment with Amen or I choose courage, and subscribe for more stories that remind us we're never walking alone. May God bless you, protect your home, and guide your steps with peace.